So really our conversation for today is around addressing inequalities through the ESG strategies. Inequality, it's one of the triple Ks for South Africa. Accompanied with that is the unemployment and the poverty. And we know that, and we see it, that it continuously persists. And then sometimes it's between the countries, and in some parts of the world, it's becoming more pronounced within the countries. For instance, I just read a very disturbing stat, that South Africa is actually it's in the category of one of the most unequal countries globally. So I zoomed on some of the stats to just see, what are we referring to? So one of the examples that they gave was that 20% of the wealth of South Africa's wealth is, 70% of the wealth is in the hands of about 20% of the population. And that talks about that wealth disparity. So we know that the inequality then it's obviously a big challenge in the sense that it impacts the economical side of things, the social side of things, the political side of things, and even the governance, which is why then today we will be having this conversation amongst ourselves as to what we believe organizations need to be doing in order to address this inequality or disparity very urgently in order to create a more inclusive, equitable, and sustainable future. So with that being said, let me just kickstart with you, Ntheye. Maybe let's unpack it first. In your views, what do you believe the future inequalities are, or rather we are foreseeing that we believe can be addressed by addressed through the ESG?
Thank you very much, firstly, for the opportunity to share some of our thoughts from an insurance perspective. That is a very important question that you've asked, and as an insurer, one of the ones that you've talked about, which is economic disparity, is one that's very important. I think most of the panel members, for instance, would know that, when it comes to access to banking, as an example, we get 85% of adult population, having access to banking, whereas because of economic inequalities on, access to infrastructure and things like that and assets, we find that only 11% of adults in South Africa actually have access to insurance. So that's a very big economic inequality because, as you know, typically the insurance is what restitutes you when you have, a significant loss in terms of an asset. There are other inequalities also that from an insurance perspective that we find to be incredibly important. One of those is access to education. It continues to remain very unequal. So whilst a lot of progress has been made in the country to bridge the gap between, historical injustices and access to education in the past, we're still seeing a very big disparity as it comes to STEM, for example. So access to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And for my colleague Cesar here, who's an actuary, he will tell you that you need that foundation if you're going to then get into have an insurance career. But it doesn't end there. There are other disparities such as gender that continue to be perpetuated. I know my leader here happens to be the fortunate 25% of C-suite who are women. So you can imagine that 3 in every 4 in a C-suite are actually men. So that's something that we need to look at it. And by the way, that disparity obviously cascades right down different layers of careers. And then there's also spatial disparities. I'm sure Cesar will touch on it. So things like, the infrastructure within places where we live. Do previously underserved communities have similar infrastructure set to fight fire? Same type of infrastructure when it comes to alleviating floods. These are the kind of disparities that we need to look at. And finally, one that is close to my heart is disparity of youth opportunities. So we continue to see that whilst we're making marginal improvements in unemployment rates in South Africa, but Q4 were 31% unemployment, 70% of the unemployed are within the 15 to 24 or 16 to 24 age group, meaning that we still have to look at that disparity. Now, all that being said, you realize that ESG, as you mentioned, has got 3 letters, E, S, and G. Oftentimes we talk about the environmental aspect, but there's an S in there where we think we can play to address economic disparities, disparities in education, disparities in spatial infrastructure between previously underserved communities, and obviously youth marginalization.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ntheye.
Yeah.
Maybe, Caesar, let us just drill directly on what some of the things that Ntheye has spoken about. We obviously in the insurance sector, some of the inequalities might be perceived, or the industry could be perceived as a contributor, to some of these inequalities and the disparities. When you talk about maybe the protection gap or uninsurability risk, maybe unpack that a little bit for us, and then just share with us what do you believe are the drivers of that as well.
Sure. So just to say up front, the protection gap is essentially the difference between what's insured and what's not insured. And Swiss Re estimates for South Africa over the last 10 years on average, the protection gap to be about 70%. So that means for every 1 billion rand of losses from some event, such as a catastrophe event, 700 million rand, 70% of that is uninsured. So that's the protection gap. And what's driving that, if we look at geospatial or catastrophe losses and climate losses specifically, is climate change. So as climate change worsens over time, what will happen is the events such as floods, rain, severe storms, and so forth, those will get worse and worse. And your insured losses will get larger, damage to infrastructure and so forth will get worse, and that insurance protection gap will increase. And then paired with that as well, urbanization, but not just urbanization of everyone going to central areas, but also moving there, and then the infrastructure itself being inadequate to support when these events happen. So now you have these two events compounding each other, climate change making weather-related events more severe, and then the infrastructure not being able to put up with the rapid urbanization. And then finally, another driver is just affordability, and Ntheye touched on this a little bit. So vulnerable communities in certain areas, they don't have financial means to withstand these losses, and that perpetuates the insurance gap. So over time, as these events happen, damage occurs in the areas, the infrastructure dilapidates, doesn't get repaired over time, and you see then the insurance protection gap is driven even wider than before.
Excellent. So the climate change is still a reality. I'm not gonna say it's opposed to who, We actually even see it. You see it, some of us, women of my age, we've got our own personal climate change, that we kind of like, yeah. So really it is, it's a reality. But anyway, back to that then. What? All right. Yeah, you sometimes think, some of us who believe, in the Holy Spirit, you think you've got a Holy Spirit that is upon you, then it's not actually that. It's something else that is currently happening. But anyway, Caesar, maybe just go back to you again. So, being in the insurance sector and understanding this protection gap or this uninsurability gap, and the fact that we need to play a role in this as well, what do you believe we ought to be doing then as the insurers to try and play and sort out this gap that you're talking about?
Yes. So I think when it comes to any risk that you face, the first point you would start, or at least the first point I would start, is to understand the risk. And that comes down to the climate science behind the risk and building models to understand where the risk lies, what's driving the risk, so that you can predict or in some way understand the drivers behind it and where it's happening. So as the insurance industry, I think the first point to look at is when we're assessing risks, to incorporate the latest climate science, but also then bring in a view of vulnerability. So I think what's excluded from a lot of assessments is not considering the vulnerability of communities. So we may typically serve the metropolitan areas and major areas where financial industries sit, but you'll typically find your most vulnerable communities to be outlying, and there the markets struggle the most. So I think pairing climate science and understanding what's driving these risks with a clear understanding of vulnerability. Once you have those two pieces combined, you know what's driving the risk and you know where vulnerable communities are most impacted by the risk. Then you can, as the insurance industry, go out and consider ways to reduce the impact on vulnerable communities. And one great example of that is partnering with NGOs or government and saying, well, we've done the research and we know that, there's certain risks in this area driven by infrastructure challenges or what have you, and the community as well is vulnerable and they don't have the means to acquire insurance to protect themselves against this risk. So we can then use the information we have, partner with government and say, well, these are the solutions that we can provide to try and help this community and break the insurance protection gap there. So that's one example. Another example would also be developing products that specifically serve those communities. So one example would be parametric insurance. And if you're not familiar with parametric insurance, it's an insurance product where your payout is a fixed amount that's linked to some threshold being exceeded. So for example, in a certain area, there might be flooding and driven by rain, and the flooding level you might measure as 50 centimeters of flooding. The insurance product might pay out a fixed benefit then when that threshold is exceeded. And that then allows the community to get rapid claim settlement at typically what is a more affordable rate. But the problem currently is that it's not it's not approved by regulation, so you can't actually build products like that. So I think there again, it helps for the insurance industry to engage and start developing these products that can serve more vulnerable communities. And then a final one also linked to product design is also thinking about not pure risk mitigation, but in cases where you can reduce risk doing so. So there's often the argument made that in certain areas, for example, California in the US, the area becomes uninsurable. And it shouldn't be the case that it's uninsurable. It should be the case that at certain degrees you can't mitigate against the entire risk, but you can still provide assistance to reduce the impact of that risk. So I would sum up those as kind of three key areas the way insurance industry can assist.
So what I'm hearing you saying is that indeed, you from the actuary perspective, we have to look from the business side of things, from the insurance side of things, because we also need to build sustainable industry, and also we need to be able to give back the return to our shareholders, which is what then all these things that we need to be doing. Maybe Ntheye, let me bring you in here, from the responsible business side of things and building resilience and adaptation and all these great things. What do you believe we ought to be doing as the insurance industry? And if it is possible, you can talk about typical examples of what we are doing, maybe as OMI or as the industry, to try and contribute to this.
Very, very important question. And I'm happy to share very specific examples that relate to, how we've approached this. So, the first thing that we did obviously was to clarify for ourselves, where we think we can play. And so we looked at what we're calling our superpowers. Now, we happen to have a very beautiful name, Old Mutual Insure. So glad to take the last 4 letters of Insure and create a SURE strategy. And the S standing for, obviously, SMME development, the U being uplifting the communities we serve, our customers, and those impacted, by climate change. And the UR being for responsible governance. And finally, the E on environmental action. I just want to zero in very briefly on the 4. So on SMME development, which, by the way, we're also adding sustainable underwriting to that, we really see that, as an insurance company, in terms of our claims payments, we pay a couple of billions a year. And if you look at the kind of service providers to whom we pay our claims, it's usually auto body repairers for vehicles. It could be plumbers. It could be electricians. So you're looking at small to medium enterprises, really. So we think that we've got a very large voice in the billions of rands, that allows us to be on the table to make a difference, where we can be very deliberate and specific, how we direct our spend, how we can support those small, medium businesses that are pretty much servicing claims. But we're not just looking at the claim side. We're also saying historically the insurance business has been tilted towards, it hasn't been fully represented on the black broker side. So we're engaging in a lot of initiatives where we're bringing black brokers up to speed so they can participate in this insurance value chain. So that's the S side. Then on the U, there's quite a lot that we've done, saying, uplift employees, community as well as our customers. And one of the things that we've done that we're very proud of internally is that we've launched 3 very interesting programs that are targeted particularly at bridging the gender gap. And we call them very proudly She Thrives, She Aspires, and She Excels. And what we've seen there, it's at different levels where we try to obviously bridge this gender gap, particularly, in the organization. But we're also looking at areas where Cesar would have mentioned, vulnerable areas where, for instance, climate change, things like floods impact people. We've got a very specific program there where we support those vulnerable communities that are impacted. And then obviously on the environmental action, I think there's a more qualified actuary here to delve much deeper into that.
Excellent. So in your views, maybe I just want to just go back to the one of the climate change. And I like how you've just explained how we've incorporated our strategy into the ESG, with the SURE strategy. We're putting a SURE in OM.
Insure.
That's what I mean. Yes, yeah. But with regards to, maybe both of you can speak to this, I want to go back to the one of the climate change, and the fact that there's this perception that the insurance industry, we saw what happened in California with California fires, where there is a disaster, then we pull out, we pull out of that risk. And, and which I always say that maybe it's around protecting today's margins at the expense of the future revenue. So on that one specifically, yes, with the responsibility of having to give back the returns and investment to the, to the shareholders, and the fact that a risk is, it's uncertainty, but once you know that it is certain, then it makes the conversation a little bit different. But what do you believe needs to be done by the insurance industry so that they can actually build that resilience and the climate resilience, and also make sure that they don't, compromise future revenues at the expense of just protecting today's margin?
I can chip in very quickly. So it's not what you think should be done. We've actually taken a step. We're putting money where our mouth is. So we have collaborated, and I think, as many of you would appreciate, SDG 17, which talks about collaborations for sustainability. We've taken that seriously and practically. So on the fire side, what we've done is that we're collaborating with some of the biggest insurers in this space, because we believe this is obviously a challenge that impacts pretty much everybody. So along with traditionally who would be our competitors, we formulated what is known as the Fighting Fire Services in South Africa. It's an NPO. We've invested 50 million rands, and you are likely going to be hearing about that. The intention of it is to help.
Here, just move this.
Yeah, so I think there's a signal issue. I'm not sure. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. I think if it struggles. So the intention of that is obviously to identify the most vulnerable municipalities in South Africa that are impacted by the fire risk and help improve infrastructure. It will require collaboration with municipalities, national government, and the rest of it. But it's not ending only on the fire risk. On the flood risk, we're also collaborating with Climate Disaster Relief Fund, with the World Resources Institute, with the Center for Scientific and Industrial Research, the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. And, in that sense, we're trying to pilot a few initiatives where we think that we can target some of the most impacted areas, and we can support them either through infrastructure, and also through, definitely by using the models, some of which that CESA, creates, and also the secondary benefit to create employment, particularly, with youths who can support, some of the initiatives that we are driving there.
Excellent. CESA?
Yeah, so going back to the point that the insurance industry gets a bad reputation when they can't cover some of the risks, I think the important thing there is that insurance relies on diversification and pooling of risk. And areas that become high risk, if you can no longer insure them, that puts at risk the ability for insurers to do that. So it's crucial then for insurers to understand, as you say, not what will help margins now, but what does the future look like? And that means incorporating the impacts of climate change and infrastructure and urbanization development into our understanding of how large and severe these risks can be, to have a forward-looking view of what we may be in store for in 10 to 15 years. If you have that ability now across the country to say these areas are not at risk now but will be at risk in future, these areas will have higher risk, then you start painting the picture of how should we start structuring and how should we be putting away money or investing so that in future we can still, as an industry, be able to insure all these areas. So that then goes back to what Ntheye touched on as well, the models and building climate change into the model. So to support efforts such as the fire response, we've built models internally that maps fire risk across the whole of South Africa, so not focusing on any certain metropolitan areas. We look at South Africa as a whole, and that gives us an idea of where fire risk is at the moment. And if you pair that, as well as your other elements of flood risk, we also incorporate climate change into forward-looking views. for over time, if you pair your picture of risk and what it looks like now and how you project it going forward, and you bring in vulnerability, you now understand where the future risk will sit and what is jeopardizing your ability to insure going forward. And now if you can put in initiatives such as Ntheye mentioned, partnering with the Climate Disaster Resilience Fund to fix infrastructure to prevent these events happening in future, what you do then is you start changing the story that over time things will become uninsurable, and you start moving to a point where we can see that these specific areas are vulnerable and will become uninsurable, but through our initiatives we can safeguard the fact that going forward we can still pool our risks and be able to insure wider areas without losing the ability to actually fund and protect them.
I like what you guys are saying. So maybe just to sum that up. So one is we've got, as actuaries, you do modeling that gives very wealthy information, and data. So we can use that data to inform even the likes of the municipalities, whether maybe where the flood line is, so that there could be preventative measures that can be put in place. That is one of the things that you can do. But also, Ntheye, you mentioned the collaboration. Also, my belief is that this particular risk or issue, it cannot be sorted out through competition, but through collaboration, which is why then we partner and collaborate with other insurers. I think you mentioned the one of the fire, the fire services, collaborate with other insurance companies, collaborate with the government, collaborate with you're in academia yourself, with the academias and stuff like that, in order to be able to deal with this particular issue. One of the things that I'm also thinking about is around the influence that insurance industry actually has, but maybe we are not really stepping into it. If we can say as an insurance, we will not be able to cover your house if it is not maybe built for good, or we will give you the discount if you build for good. Say, for instance, you use the hemp bricks as an example that do not catch fire. If you use hemp bricks in building your house, then we're going to give you a discount. So by so doing, we are kind of like informing and influencing this build for good and building kind of like sustainable, a property industry. So maybe that is one of the things that you can be looking at. Okay, so let us talk then, and Ntheye, you've already started to talk about the other inequalities that we can address through the ESG initiatives. You touched a little bit around the SMMEs. Okay, maybe elaborate more as to what can we do. I mean, that talks about access to financial services, and we know SMMEs face different challenges, but what can the organizations do to bridge the gap of inequality when it comes to the SMMEs?
Truly important gap that we're facing currently in the country, which is, it also starts firstly with artisanships. As I mentioned, majority of the kind of claims and what we pay for relate to things like auto body repairers, electricians, plumbers. So it starts from there. What we're making very specific contributions to upskill people who are willing to be in these fields. We've run some programs that are providing upskilling for things like plumbers. That's the first part where we give skills. The second part is, part of this, gap relates to quality of education. So you might be a skilled artisan, but do you have the business knowledge as to how to write a business case? How then do you get access to the market itself? So there are very intended programs also that we're supporting small businesses to have that capability. And then ultimately, being preferential in terms of how we spend ourselves. We bring them on board and then they become our suppliers. So, and our target obviously, would be to have very specific targets on, what we spend towards Black-owned businesses as well as Black women-owned businesses. So those are some of the interventions that we're making. And in some cases, it's not even the small entities that are on our value chain. We also include entities, that where we see, there is value to the community, and then we can support those as well from an SMME perspective.
Okay. All right. So it's not only around financial support, but we can also give them access to some of the infrastructure that the big corporates have got.
Absolutely. And in fact, I mean, if we really think about it, if we are going to make a meaningful difference, those are some of the things where we can visibly sort of see it. What access have you given? Have you really onboarded an SMME business into your value chain? How much are you spending? How much spend are you directing to that SME business? And in your support, is your support then translating to them having access to the market wide of just yourself as an insurer? But are these people also providing support to other businesses and potentially even other insurers? So that's how we're approaching this particular challenge.
Okay. All right. Then there is, you find that there are people that are very keen, to contribute to some of these, these issues that we are facing. What can we do in order to encourage maybe employees, to volunteer or to participate in dealing with this problem? Because it is not only, I know that we're speaking as companies, but companies are also made up of human beings, of people. So what can the individuals actually do as well in order to contribute into solving some of these social ills?
Yeah, I think we can be very grateful that we've got a South African spirit of giving. And that's a very powerful spirit that, we hope that we can continue to nourish and grow. And, fortunately for us, we've got avenues within the company where we're supporting volunteerism. So, where we observe a need in a community, be it building a library, be it providing a soup kitchen, and sometimes even saying, volunteer to maybe raise money when we partner with institutes such as Reach for a Dream. So there's many such initiatives that we do. We also do something very, very interesting that we're very proud of, which is a program, and I'm only mentioning this because it's part of the giving back that we do. So we do have a program called Empowering Girls, or Mutual Insure Empowering Girls, where the intention is to get girls at a in the grade 11 sort of level and encourage them to go through the STEM program, because we believe, as I mentioned earlier, that gives them a very big opportunity. That's an area where girls are underrepresented. But the other way the reason I'm mentioning this is that not only do we think that there's value in that program, but the giving back also relates to the mentoring that women who are already in the work environment are offering the young ladies. So that's obviously time spent, mentor a young lady who then sees precisely what a career within insurance would look like and what opportunities lay out there. So there's many ways of giving back, I guess.
All right. Okay. Cesar, do you want to add anything around any other initiatives that organizations can do to actually deal with the inequality gap?
I think so. When we speak specifically about community initiatives, for example, you'll see a lot of homeowners associations or security or community watch groups, and that's kind of addressing the risk of crime. But why not apply the same idea to risks in your area or inequalities you see stemming from the fact that your infrastructure and your exposure to these risks is not up to scratch? So you can take those community groups and put together a view of the problems you face, and then go to industry, present your case to industry, and then we as the industry, I think, should be open and willing to view those and say, well, this area is vulnerable and it's facing a risk, something that we insure. How can we work with them? How can we provide them the resources and skills they need to close this gap and slowly over time reduce the overall insurance protection gap?
Okay. And what do you believe has been maybe the reasons that has not been done as yet? Do you think maybe it's lack of knowledge, it's lack of, knowing that this is actually a possibility? Is it us, maybe the insurance, not reaching out and sharing that these are the things that, communities can do? What do you believe the reasons to be?
Yeah, I think the insurance industry, to a lot of people, has a very bad reputation because often when a loss happens, you'll read in the news that they're not covering this amount. So it doesn't make good news to see that an insurance company covered, billions of losses, but it makes good news to see what they didn't cover. And that's not always the fault of the insurance industry. That's could be many reasons that contribute to that. So I think the reason communities don't go out to insurers and voice their concerns is because they feel that they won't be heard. And I think one way the insurance industry can change that, and it alludes to a point you made earlier related to incentivizing people and working with them to say, you're facing these risks, how can we improve that, is to provide a little bit more, on the one hand, communication and discussion with the community. So go into vulnerable areas, go into underserved areas as an insurer, don't push a product, but go and push an understanding of, well, these are the risks you face. First of all, are you aware of the risks you face? This is what we see from our information. Are you aware of the risks you face? And how can we work with you, the community, to close this gap? And in other cases where the community does reach out to insurance and get quotes, and sometimes get responses for premiums and so forth that are too high because of the uninsurability or because the risk is so great, for the insurer then to give more information beyond the fact that, this is just a premium, but to actually say, as you said, well, this is the assessment we did, this is the information we found, you're facing these risks because of these items. If you do X, Y, Z, then this is how you can reduce that risk. And you then in a community can go and say, well, this is what the insurer has told us. Can we pull together and make it work? So I think it really boils down to the reputation of the insurance industry. So hopefully the two can meet together and try and put some community initiatives together to respond.
Excellent. Yeah, I think Cesar, you have assisted a great deal as well, just to share the perspective, because there is definitely that perception. And it has been seen coming, from the times of COVID, to the times of the surge claims, to the floods, to what is happening, like I've said, to what is happening, we've seen in California. There is that perception that is currently being created. But I think what you have just shared now is the demonstration that how we can all really collaborate. We all have got a role to play. We all have got a contribution to make. And the conversation that we're having right now is to indicate that the insurance industry and the insurance organizations, companies rather, they are actually participating and contributing in solving these inequalities and some of these social ills. Yeah. Okay. I think I'm looking at the time, and I also would love to. I'm not too sure if that is allowed, but I mean, if there are any questions, from the audience that would love to, that they would love to ask our panelists, I think we're going to be more than happy to do that. Maybe while we're waiting for that, the last question that I just want to ask is, it's all well and good to talk about these things. How can we actually have, or rather, what are the most effective metrics that we can actually use to measure if we are really progressing when it comes to all these things that we have been talking about? I mean, that we are really tackling inequalities. What do you believe are some of the metrics or the things that can kind of like indicate maybe a year or two, or even by 2030 when we look back and we say, indeed, this has happened because we're tracking those metrics? What are your views?
Yeah, as the old adage goes, you really can't manage what you can measure. So
say that again.
You really can't manage what you can measure.
Got you.
So if we look at, for instance, bring it back to home, if we say, our SURE strategy, and we look at SMME development or sustainable underwriting, the question is, over time, can we measure how much spend we're directing to SMMEs? And it's a number. It can be a percentage of, our overall expense on procurement. And that's a very easy measure to say, we've moved from spending X amount from Black-owned or Black women-owned businesses to Y. It has to be a very specific metric, and then that obviously differentiates. Similarly, it can be, the businesses, the SMMEs that we've supported, how much access to the market have they had? In other words, how much have they grown their own turnovers or their own revenues in their businesses? That's translatable. It's very specific, measurable numbers. The question of brokers, how many Black brokers have we then allowed to bring business into our book? Through the black brokers, that's very clear, measurable. When we talk about uplifting our employees, communities we serve, very specific measures can be how many, for instance, with our She Thrives, She Aspires, and She Excels, how many young ladies within our organization have we put through these programs, and what impact are these translating to opportunities when promotions arise? In other words, are they rising up the ladder so they can be in your position as an example, as a leader? Those are very measurable. If we look at environmental action and what we're doing with partnerships, so supporting fire services, our recent, for example, some of the things that we're tracking, this supporting fire services also collaborates, I should have mentioned, with the, Stellenbosch University. And they've developed very specific metrics to see where the support services have been provided, how much in insured losses we've prevented from losing. So those are very specific measures that I can go on and on, but this is an area of tremendous excitement for me. So I think that, the reality is maybe we need to do a little bit more as to just be transparent as to some of the measures we're doing. So, it can be well known how, what difference we're making in our own small way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think, as an industry, overall, the one to measure is the insurance protection gap itself. And you can split that, you can look at the whole country and you can split that down to province or area. And you can see over time, if that gap is reducing, then the efforts are working to reduce the gap. But then more specifically, measuring your investment into initiatives such as partnering with communities and public enterprises, and then tracking the return. And when I say return, I don't necessarily mean financial return. I mean the impact in terms of has it benefited the community. So if you identified a certain area was at risk of floods, has your investment reduced the occurrence of floods, the frequency of floods? Have the number of losses reduced? Has the total amount of losses reduced? Has the insured losses increased relative to uninsured losses? So directly measuring the non-financial return, but of your investments. And then finally, something we're developing internally is creating a spatial view of where your insurance lies in the country and incorporating socioeconomic factors and vulnerability factors. So directly assessing the vulnerability of areas and seeing that has your portfolio adapted or changed over time to serve these kind of vulnerable areas or areas with less access to insurance. So tracking that and directly reporting that up into your committees to say, well, these areas previously we weren't insuring and they were at risk, but now looking at the diversity of our portfolio, we can see that our efforts have actually increased access to these areas, which is then a net benefit to the communities.
Excellent. All right. I just want to check if there is any question from the audience. I am not seeing any hands. Maybe closing shots or parting shots from your side, Ntheye, and then I'll end up with you, Caesar.
Yeah, I think we should really, and every one of us in attendance should really consider ourselves fortunate to be contributing in our own way to a very important challenge that we face, which is around ensuring sustainability of our planet for the future generation. I know sometimes we reduce it to acronyms, ESG, but the reality is that we have got many ways in which we can, contribute. We need to have, a sense of urgency and self-agency around this. So I think I'm also very grateful, obviously, to share, what we're doing as an organization. But I think the encouragement is, not just from an organization perspective. We each one of us have got individual ways in which we can contribute, be it either being environmentally conscious or giving back to the community, from our, favored positions. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Right, so I'll touch on a question that I've always had that relates to climate change. And when you think of climate change, it's this huge problem that we face, and you see a lot of big organizations doing all these different things to address climate change, and big companies reducing their carbon emissions and so forth. But the question I've always grappled with is, me as an individual, what can I do? Because you feel kind of small as a single person. Will your efforts really do anything to fight climate change? And we can extend that argument then to overall sustainability and equality and so forth. And I think even though we as individuals have what feels like to us a very insignificant impact, I think what's a larger impact that we can enforce is a culture change. And once you start doing little things for yourself and you try and change the culture of those around you, what you'll see is that spreads out, and the culture change eventually becomes something that's commonplace in society. So even though we as individuals don't have the amount of spending, and we don't have the big impact to impact these events at a huge scale, our individual actions and the culture change that it causes over time addresses these problems. And some specific examples there are demanding things or working towards things that we need. So if areas are underserved for whatever reason, if we can identify why, perhaps it's a regulation or perhaps there's a lack of products, It's going out and voting with our money and voting with our choices to say, well, I'm not supporting XYZ, which doesn't work towards solving this problem. I'm rather supporting ABC, which will help to solve this problem. And then I'm lobbying communities and I'm lobbying regulation to try and see the changes that I think will make a major impact. So I think it really comes down to a culture change.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you so much, Ntheye, and thank you so much, Caesar, and to the rest of the audience, thank you so much as well. From my side, what I just want to leave you with is that obviously, if we do not contribute in solving some of these social ills, like inequality, we're obviously not going to be having the planet to live in. We're not going to be having, the pool of customers to service, and mostly we're not going to be having a place to spend our money on as businesses. Thank you very much.